Hi, my name is Justine Harkness, and in this video we will look at how to identify branched chain alkanes. Now, a branched chain alkane is any alkane that has a carbon attached to 3 or more other carbon atoms. So let's just start by drawing out a straight chain alkane. Now notice in this straight chain alkane, each carbon is attached to only 1 or 2 other carbons, making it a straight chain alkane. But if we were to attach another carbon, notice that this carbon is attached to 3 other carbons. So this molecule drawn here would be a branched chain alkane. Now, branched chain alkanes could have just one branch point, but if we were to add another carbon, notice now that we have 2 branch points. So let's take a look at some examples and identify some branched chain alkanes. Now, there are 2 different ways that we could go about identifying these branched chain alkanes. And the first way is to just draw out a Lewis structure of the molecule. So let's do that for example A. So we'll start with our first carbon on the left. Notice that this carbon is attached to 3 hydrogens. And it's also attached to 1 carbon. The second carbon in line is attached to 2 hydrogens. And it's also attached to another carbon. And that final carbon is attached to 3 hydrogens. Now, looking at this Lewis structure, each one of these carbons is only attached to 1 or 2 other carbons, making this a straight chain alkane. Now, the other thing that we can do to identify a branched chain alkane is to just analyze the formula, and that's what we'll do for B. So let's start with this carbon on the left. It is attached to 1 other carbon. We'll note here we have 1 carbon attached to our first carbon. Let's look at the second carbon in line. This carbon has a carbon attached to the left and a carbon attached to the right. So we have 2 carbons attached. This third carbon, again, has 1 carbon attached on the left, 1 carbon attached on the right. So we got 2 carbons. And the final carbon is only attached to 1 other carbon. So notice that each carbon in this molecule is attached to only 1 or 2 other carbons. So this would also be a straight chain alkane. Now let's take a look at C. And just at first glance, this looks a little bit different since we have these groups in parentheses. And that's something that will indicate a branch. But let's first start by drawing out that Lewis structure. So we'll start with a carbon on the far left. This carbon is attached to 3 hydrogens. And it's attached to this next carbon. This carbon is attached to 1 hydrogen, but it's also attached to this group in parentheses. We have a CH3 group, and it's attached to the next carbon in the chain. This carbon again, next in line, is attached to 1 hydrogen. It's attached to this CH3 group, and it's attached to this next carbon in line, and that final carbon is only attached to 3 hydrogens. Now, looking at this Lewis structure, what we see are 2 carbons that are attached to 3 other carbons. So this molecule here is 100% a branched chain alkane. Finally, let's look at D and use that same method that we used for B, just looking at each carbon and counting the number of attached carbons. So looking at carbon 1, it is attached to 1 carbon. Looking at carbon 2, it's attached to 1 carbon on the left. And notice this subscript of 2, this carbon is attached to 2 CH3 groups. So this carbon has 3 attached carbons. And those CH3s, each one of these carbons is attached to only one carbon. But notice because of this 3, this would be a branched chain alkane.